This is Stephen Kotler, and you're listening to Your Superior Self.
Hi, I'm Anita Murjani, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hello, this is Dr. Raymond Moody, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, Cultural Creatives. I'm Bruce Lipton, and I'm here to join you with Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Paul Selig, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm Trey Downs, and this is Your Superior Self podcast, the podcast that helps us reconnect with that greatness that is inside of us, the innate greatness right here inside of you, not down the street, not in the next town, not in a different country, right here. Right here. And to help us connect with that greatness, to push us deeper into that, I have Professor Bob Thurman joining the show. And Bob is a wild man. Like, he is a wild man. His energy levels are just off the charts. He's so captivating when he speaks. And he's a little mischievous. I'm going to call him the Wild Buddha. The Wild Buddha, for sure. And why do I call him that? Well, he's the first Westerner Tibetan Buddhist monk ordained by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Yeah. I mean, in 1997, he was, I think, in Time magazine for one of the 25 most influential Americans, describing him larger than life scholar activist, destined to convey the Dharma. Yeah, he's a wild Buddha. I truly enjoyed this conversation, and to give you some context about his presence, here is Bob telling a story about his guru.
Absolutely. He was a real great being. He was really a great person. And you know, the other thing he did, which is surprising, when I would try to meditate, when I was first learning with him, first year and a half or so, he would interrupt me. And he had clairvoyance or something, because I'd be 3 o'clock in my room and I'd just be about to go out of body by meditating. No drugs at all in that time, nothing. But I'd be about to go out of my body. And he would knock on the door like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you sleeping? What's the matter with you? Are you nervous? Are you unhappy?" I said, "No, what do you mean? Don't bother me. I'm meditating. I'm grooving by meditation." And he would always interrupt. And I'd practically sneak out and go under a tree someplace. And then he would always catch me, pretend to be taking the dog for a walk at 2 a.m. and find me and say, "What are you doing under the tree? You'll get arrested. People will think you're a crazy person in the neighborhood here." You know? Years later, I realized that was so good, because there's a thing in the tradition that if you attain certain types of states where, you know, like an altered state where you feel really cooled out, you know, and almost like you're tasting nirvana or something. I mean, it isn't the full thing, but you get into something it's like a place you can always go and just be cooled out. But what that can do is that can be addictive. Mm-hmm. And then that dulls your mind. And then you don't try to learn deeper, and you don't try to interact with people and develop an ability to avoid reacting in some habitual ways and really change your sort of whole being, rather than just have a place to go hide for a while and come back. So it's called attaining quiescence of sensation and thought at the wrong time.
I love all of that, and I love this conversation, and I hope you do too. If you want to find out more about Bob Thurman, you can do that by going to bobthurman.com. Make sure you buy his new book, Wisdom is Bliss. It talks about so many great key concepts about Buddhism and what it means to him and how he brings it together. It's sprinkled in with a little bit of politics. I mean, it is very worth reading. And to give you a little bit of, I might read one small part of chapter 1 to give you an idea of what this is about. The Buddha Path. This book is about getting real while having fun along the way. Maybe you're surprised to hear that things like Buddhas, enlightened persons, enlightenment, spirituality, or wisdom have anything to do with reality, or even more astonishing, with joy or even fun. You might think reality is dreadful. Joy is all too rare, and fun is childish, while the spiritual life is supposed to be terribly serious. And that's Bob in a nutshell. He's having fun. He's having fun, and he's aware of what it is we're in this reality. I mean, I like being around that. I love it because it helps me put things in perspective as far as like, what is it that we're searching for? What is enlightenment? Is it a thing that is obtained through rigorous and disciplined practices, or is it something that is when you're ready, it happens to you? I mean, that's the joy of the journey, right? Like finding it out for yourself. I'm just glad we have teachers like Bob. We have people that we can talk to. We can read their work. We can read their philosophy. We can see their subjective take on things, and then kind of like take and discard things that we want to in our own journey. And then kind of, I mean, it's like what Ram Dass said, like we're all just walking each other home. It's like the mountain has a million ways up to the top, but there is the top. That is the destination. And what that looks like, it might be different for you. I would say this: don't stop, keep going, stay on your path, whatever that looks like. Don't adopt anybody else's beliefs. Go off of your own experiences. Your experiences are what teach you the best. Yeah. With that said, guys, I'm excited to be able to present this conversation to you. So without further ado, here is the great and powerful Bob Thurman.
Bob Thurman, and this is me. I'm a retired professor of Buddhology, which means the study of enlightened beings. And I'm talking to you from my home. And I'm really delighted to be speaking with Trey Downs about my superior self. Although, as I said to Trey, I don't know if I have one, but I work on it. I'm working on it. So great to meet you, Trey, and look forward to chatting with you.
I cannot wait. This is amazing. I read your book. It's amazing. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. So I think I read about, or I heard about you in Ram Dass's book about, I don't know, back in Harvard. Did you guys run into each other back then?
Yes. I knew him in 1959, 1960 when he was at Harvard, and I was an undergraduate at that time. And Dr. Richard Alpert, he had a little green Mercedes convertible that he drove around in with a big smile on his face, handsome man. And he had a lot of students and friends, and he and Tim Leary and Ralph Metzner were doing very interesting research with the in the psych department. They had the Center for Personality Research, it was called, and it was right across the street from the East Asia Language Center, which at the time I wasn't into particularly, but later I spent a lot of time on that little street, called Divinity Avenue on the Harvard campus. So then of course everybody went through many different reincarnations. And Dr. Richard Alpert became Ram Dass. And wonderful. And actually, I personally believe from an intellectual and college professor, he became a saint. And I think really he went out an actual saint. He was like one of our first American Hindu, if you want to say, like Hindu Jewish saint. And he really was. And I met him a bunch of times toward the end. And he deeply moved. I was deeply moved by him. I saw him in between here and there during the psychedelic phase, and he was also quite interesting at every level of the phase. But by the end, he was just truly a loving being, and truly sticking up for people and trying to help them bring out the best in themselves.
Did you
talk about superior self? I think he showed a greatly superior self, even as his body was breaking down, actually, as he was getting older. He really did. He was really an inspiration. He still is an inspiration.
Absolutely. Did you ever dabble in psychedelics?
Sure.
Yeah.
I dabbled.
What were those experiences like?
Dabbled and dribbled and doubled. I had my ups and downs, my ons and offs. And many years without it, of course, because it was all impossible for many, many years. But I had it had a very important role in my life, I can say. And I think it has it is coming to be recognized in our culture as having a very important role in psychotherapy. especially by clinical people. I think that I'm not sure what the research people really are thinking and doing, but clinical people are doing enough research to back up their clinical success. And they've been tremendously helpful with depressed people, with PTSD veterans, and so on, people who've been abused, people, tremendous, there are a bunch of new research all over the country. And I think it's a very good idea. So I'm not embarrassed about it. I think it's wonderful.
I think it's awesome. I think it's, do you think it led you down that road, or maybe it sparked something inside you, a curiosity to figure out more about what life is, it sparked that interest in finding out what the East was like, India, meditation, like true spirituality?
Definitely. The thing is, the way I see it is like history and the role of our industrial culture in history. And in fact, psychedelics originate mostly with plants. Some of them artificial chemical, but mostly originate with plants. And for thousands of years, societies have had saints or shamans or monks and nuns who have gone into deep spiritual areas and become sort of healers, doctors, medicine men, medicine women, and a certain profession was always like that. And they often had the help of plants, and they communicated with nature in a certain way through plants, and also through fasting and what they call vision quests and things like that, because your own bodily chemistry produces these neurotransmitters that alter your consciousness dramatically, like if you fast for 40 days, like Jesus did. And but it was only a rare person who did that, and they did then return to their societies, many of them, and served a very useful role, spiritual leaders, healers, leaders, and so on. But nowadays, in the modern time, there's so many of us on the planet. Our footprint as human beings, because of magnifying our behavior through industrial machinery of various types, subtle and heavyweight, is so powerful that it is important, I think, that a lot of us go into these deeper areas and understand how the brain works, how conditioning, how culture shapes our perception and so forth, and learns to control these kind of mental things that only a very few were expected to control in the past. So one thing that I think has helped us to do that in the past 50, 60 years is this rediscovery since the 50s, more or less, of in a broader scale of the role of psychedelic plants, or entheogenic plants, as Houston Smith used to call them, mind-transforming plants that will help the mind. And they're a very specific type of plant. It isn't like a downer type of heroin type of just drugged out thing where you become numb. It isn't a hepped up thing like artificial cocaine or amphetamine or things like that. Those are a different category entirely. They're very addictive, very damaging to the health, and quite dangerous, actually. And mass use of that is very destructive in a society. But these things are never going to be addictive, never going to be mass induced, because they introduce someone to really seeing their own reality in a deeper way. And that's not addictive. That can be scary for many. And in fact, certain fragile people shouldn't do it, except in a very controlled way with very, very capable therapists and so forth, in case they have some other kind of mental problems. But once it's used that way, it's very, very effective. And since they were banned and for political reasons, and they were put in a schedule with addictive drugs, and I mean, much more addictive drugs, nicotine and alcohol are more addictive actually than any kind of psychedelic, and they are legal. But once these psychedelics were put in the category of dangerous drugs or addictive ones, the ability of clinical people to help people in therapy by using them was crippled. And then the pharmaceutical companies got into making fortunes selling Prozac and other kinds of mind-altering drugs that are not actually good for you and don't actually introduce you to a deeper level. They just palliate the symptoms of depression and other such things, and they don't relieve and cure the problem. So now that the psychedelics are coming back, hopefully those money-making pharmaceutical people will try to get into it, and they won't be allowed to damage the movement, hopefully. And they might produce things that really will help people rather than just things they can sell to them that don't really help them. And in fact, imbalance their brains in a certain ways,
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. What interests me is, like, so you go from psychedelics, you go from Harvard. What sparked that interest into Buddhism where you wanted to go be a monk?
Okay. What that was I was among the lucky ones, I think, like Ram Dass and maybe unlike Tim Leary, where because of Tim's generational thing, but where I realized that the type of revelation that you can get from, LSD or mescaline or mushrooms and so forth, the tryptamine family, that those things are not, they open the door to your seeing that there's all these other dimensions in the mind. But then if you just keep doing that, opening the door, you don't learn how to manage yourself in those regions, in those areas, and don't learn how to master moving through from dimensions with your mind, so that you can have the full range from the conscious, practical, down to earth, day to day, dealing with material objects around you and other people. And then you go into the sort of more expanded states. And so you master the range of that. That to do that, there must be traditions that do it. And then you find that in the Asian cultures. Because actually in history, Europe is Eurasian, right? But in all of Eurasia, where most of the dominant cultures on the planet came from Japan to England, let's say, the most advanced cultures, because the economically most wealthy, surprisingly to us nowadays, we think of Asia as backward and underdeveloped, all that sort of thing. But actually, they were more wealthy and they had more advanced cultures, and they tolerated more dissidents and people being curious and exploring different types of experience. And therefore, they were more advanced, especially in psychological sciences. And therefore, I discovered that in Hinduism, yoga traditions and so forth, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism even, and some of the other things like Shinto and the other smaller, less well-known traditions, that the Asian traditions had better psychological sciences, actually, not as religions, but as sciences. And so that then moved me to start studying the Buddhist sciences, what I would call their psychologies, thousands of years of empirical discoveries and huge literature, like a scientific literature of experiment and results of experiment and new people finding more subtle and sophisticated ways of working on it, where they just learn to control the mind with the mind, not relying on any kind of external drug or any kind of external things, but learning how the mind itself works. And because after all, we're the ones with the brain. And so if we learn to think a certain way, to meditate a certain way, to use our breathing and our inner energy circulation and control it at a subtle level, we can generate the neurotransmitters that will give us blissful states. We can prevent and lessen the ones that cause us more stress and harmful to our physiology and so forth. And we can also develop higher levels of concentration. We can learn more things. We can gain a deeper perception of things. And so that's what turned me to that. It was not really religious. I always was a rebellious type, and I never wanted to believe, just something because someone told me to, So I actually had a more scientific point of view, but always more psychology than mixing chemicals and dissecting frogs. I was not so much into all that, but I was into the science of mind, like Freud, Carl Jung, Wilhelm Reich. These were my great heroes, and some of the philosophers who virtually were psychologists, and some ancient ones in the West, like some of the ancient Christian masters, the Stoics, the Platonists, and some of the mystics in Egypt and Palestine and around there, and in Greece. So that. But the real thing that really turned me on, of course, was the Buddhist scientific tradition in India, which then got lost in India actually to a great degree, but still was preserved in Tibet. Mongolia, China, Japan, but especially Tibet got the full blast of the Indian tradition. So that was really what took me in that direction. And during that whole long period, I didn't need or use at all any kind of psychedelics, you know.
But you were married, right? Were you married with kids then? Like when you went over?
I was married. I was married before I became a monk and got into the Buddhism. I was married. I was a teenage bridegroom, and fell in love and just wouldn't be told no. Wouldn't take no for an answer. And with a wonderful lady who was the elder sister of a close friend of mine, and had a nice time. I had a beautiful daughter. I was blessed with that. And then I lost an eye, and the shock of that sort of brought home to me the idea of mortality. And it didn't really traumatize me, and I see really well with the one I have. But it woke me up. I think basically it gave me a midlife crisis at 20, if that's possible. Which was
how did you lose the eye?
Well, it's just a garage. I used to race motorcycles and cars and mess around in garages at night. And I fancied myself a poet and a writer, playwright. And I was writing and having a little writer's block. I wasn't liking how a certain piece was going. So I went down to mess around in the garage after drinking half a bottle of wine and clumsily got a tire iron in the eye. Trying to replace a tire on a wire wheel. Mm-hmm. So it's a silly thing. And really foolish accident. But it was a really great blessing, actually, as it turns out, because if I'd had a midlife crisis at 40, I wouldn't have still had the freshness of mind to learn some really new things like languages and things. I was good at languages, but by 40, I would have been lazy. And in my 20s, I could learn Tibetan and Sanskrit and Chinese and Japanese and Mongolian. And I already knew some European languages. And that you really needed that to get into the deeper levels of these Asian sciences. Spiritual, like mental sciences. You had to know the languages because there weren't that many good translations when I started out in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So that was very lucky, actually, that I had that accident. It's like the old Chinese story, of the farmer whose son breaks his leg, and then they think it's a terrible misfortune, and then the draft sergeant shows up to draft him in the latest warlord war in China, and the son can't go and get killed in this useless war between barons because he has a broken leg. Mm-hmm. And this kind of thing seems like a disaster at first, and then it turns out to be a blessing. And so that's kind of what it was. And I'm really happy and grateful that I encountered that tradition.
Well, how did you leave the family behind to pursue this?
I tried to take my wife with me, and we hadn't enough money, and I tried to get it. I would get it. I said, I'm going to India to find a guru, and to learn some more how to control my mind and my emotions, and we can get a jeep and an ayah to nurse the baby, and come on along. You can learn too, and so forth. And she just got frightened. And she was very into certain shrinks who were thinking that was not good, and that I should in fact go get like shock treatment or something that I was having. Couldn't digest having lost an eye and so on. But I was not freaked out about that much. I was actually illuminated by it. It made me decide that we're going to die someday, and I wouldn't know what to do if I did. And I wanted to learn how to deal with it, life and death. I wanted to understand the mystery of life and death. And actually, to some extent, I have. But I don't claim perfect enlightenment at all, but some steps in that direction, at least enough steps in that direction to be much happier, actually, and content and satisfied a little bit. Yeah. Ready to have fun, actually.
Yes, sir. So you go and you travel and you pursue being a monk. But they're telling you, I think the first teacher, I cannot pronounce his name, says that you're not going to be in this for the long haul, but he'll take you to the Dalai Lama and present you right anyway.
Yeah, well, he was wonderful. Geshe Wangyal was his name. He was Mongolian, but he'd lived in Tibet for 35 years. And the Mongolian Buddhists are Tibetan Buddhists. So he'd gone to the Vatican of the Mongolians, which was Tibet and Lhasa, and he'd mastered the studies there. And then he came out earlier because he knew about communism. He'd seen communist revolutions in Russia because the Kalmyks they have these different provinces in Russia, which are nowadays Russian republics. And during Yeltsin, they were liberated, Soviet Russian Federation, and then they were recaptured by the KGB through Putin, since then. But they had a moment of independence, and they're a little bit more autonomous than they used to be in the Soviet Union. And anyway, he'd seen communist revolutions. He saw them in China. He saw them in Mongolia. It was very destructive there. So the minute the Chinese communists reached Tibet, he just took off. Went to India, and then quite quickly got himself moved to New Jersey, of all places. I'm a New Yorker, grew up in New York. And I went all the way to India to find a guru. And then my dad died of a heart attack, too young, but he did. And I had to go back for a few weeks for the funeral. And I was planning because I had met the Tibetans in India, and I knew Tibet was going to be my destiny. The Tibetans had the knowledge that they had lost in India, that they originated in India, but they'd lost it there. And so I had to go back to funeral. And then just on a sort of a lark, I went to visit this teacher in New Jersey. I heard he was there, thinking to carry a message from him maybe to some friend, get some recommendations of different lamas in India that I would meet and so forth, because I'd been networking around on my way to Asia for a year. And so I was going to network. But when I met that man, that was it. We had a destiny. I couldn't go an inch further. I was just glued onto him. And that's when he's the one who said, yeah, well, you can learn a lot. You have to learn the language and it'll help you. But I don't know if you'll get enlightened in this life because you're a crazy boy. Well, you didn't stay at Harvard. You're not, making money. You're not doing what America thinks you should be doing. So, I don't know how you do, but I think it'll help you if you learn to read these books. He was like that. He was so skillful. He never acted like, oh, I'm enlightened and I can make you enlightened, like that BS that sometimes gurus do. He never did that. In fact, he always said he wasn't my guru. He was just a friend. And he said, if you take me as a guru, when I criticize you to help you grow, then you'll be angry with me. And then that would be very bad for you to be angry with your guru. So I'll just be a friend and then you can get mad at me when you think I'm criticizing you too much. And you can argue with me and you can be, more free yourself. And we won't do that. But actually, he was absolutely my guru. But he would never make it formal, which was very smart of him, actually. He was way ahead of all these later gurus who have ended up developing cults and, mindless followers who later hate them, because they didn't like being bossed around really underneath, but they would tolerate it for a while because of a kind of, weakness in their character that made them want to depend too much on somebody, Mm-hmm. Project sort of mommy and daddy on them. That's how people get into these cults.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He was a real great being. He was really a great person. Mm. And the other thing he did, which is surprising, when I would try to meditate when I was first learning with him, first year and a half or so, he would interrupt me, and he had clairvoyance or something because I'd be 3 o'clock in my room, and I'd just be about to go out of body by meditating, no drugs at all in that time, nothing. But I'd be about to go out of my body, and he would knock on the door like, what are you doing? Why aren't you sleeping? What's the matter with you? Are you nervous? Are you unhappy? I said, no, what do you mean? Don't bother me. I'm meditating. I'm grooving by meditation. And he would always interrupt. And I'd practically sneak out and go under a tree someplace. And then he would always catch me, pretend to be taking the dog for a walk at 2 a.m. and find me and say, what are you doing under the tree? You'll get arrested. People will think you're a crazy person in the neighborhood here. And years later, I realized that was so good because there's a thing in the tradition that if you attain certain types of states where, like an altered state where you feel really cooled out, and almost like you're tasting nirvana or something. I mean, it isn't the full thing, but you get into something it's like a place you can always go and just be cooled out. But what that can do is that can be addictive. Mm-hmm. And then that dulls your mind. And then you don't try to learn deeper and you don't try to interact with people and develop an ability to avoid reacting in some habitual ways and really change your sort of whole being rather than just have a place to go hide for a while and come back. So it's called attaining quiescence of sensation and thought at the wrong time. And he prevented me. I'm sure I would have done that because I was getting into where I could just call myself out. And then I don't need to learn any more things. A lot of people, I think, who practice these things and get a meditative state, a little bit tranquilized type of meditative state, then they get stuck because they wrongly think, oh, the main thing is just don't think anything and don't learn anything. But, as I say, if you meditate a lot without learning something, when you have a final moment, then you're going to jump up. And are you going to be happy? No. Your first word upon that sort of enlightenment is going to be, duh. I don't know anything. And you act like that's enlightenment, and it isn't, But I would have probably gone there if he hadn't been so skillful, because I think I had an affinity from previous lives to be triggered by these teachings, Definitely, I learned to speak the Tibetan language in 10 weeks. And I was like super fluent, pretty much, in that time. Although there's still words that I don't know. I mean, it's a huge literature, But I was fluent as far as getting around, talking with the people in that monastery.
Absolutely. And so now
I was annoying them already because I had a big mouth, and if I would learn something, I would go ask them a question about it because I knew the answer, and then I would show off, and I was a pain in the neck. I was. I still am in some degree, but not as much.
Well, how did he teach you how to meditate? Like, what was the first steps of meditation?
Well, he wouldn't teach me. He wouldn't let me meditate. He said, you have to learn a lot of stuff. You can't meditate. The good teachers don't teach you to meditate right away. What they do is you teach you to learn stuff, how to aim because meditation basically is a skill of aiming the mind at something, okay? But then the question is, what do you aim it at? We normally are a little bit self-centered by nature, by the way we're brought up. We're brought up to be a little naturally self-centered. It's sort of healthy to be naturally self-centered in a short run, just to maneuver around. But in the long run, because the way you maneuver will not be that appreciated by others, very competitive society, and, egotism is sort of appreciated even, and on some level, but actually the people you live with, they don't like it at all. And so, you have to learn how it works, and you have to develop an ability to see how other people see you and understand how your manifestations are and your prejudices and your superior habits, like what the Germans have a great expression for somebody who's snobby. They say hochnäsig, high-nosed, a high-nose-ish person. I was a little scared superior self would be like, oh, we're superior, but not really. The superior person is the person who's really there for the other people and who's sort of aware of what they're doing and doesn't just automatically hot button react at the slightest thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And can have be more cool,
Yeah.
That's really the superior one.
Well, your superior self is actually, I took it from the Ernest Hemingway quote. True nobility is not being superior to former man. True nobility is being superior to your former self.
That's it. That's really good, Ernest. That's excellent. I like that.
So
that is good.
That's
what I decided it was, of course. That it's bettering, bettering yourself and getting rid of habitual things, because and one of the things we Americans have to do, Euro-Americans at least, is we have to realize that we're raised to think of ourselves as so great and superior and the greatest, and this is the greatest country that ever was. And presidential candidates have to say, we're the greatest, like little city on a hill and all these kind of slogans they get into. And then we have to go and save everybody else, and we have to go and make democracy in this place and that place, and then destroy the whole place.
Sure.
Like we just wasted 12 trillion, is it? Or 20 trillion in Afghanistan. Yeah. And we're leaving, and they're back to Taliban, like it was, what a waste, and lives and the maimed who go on, like much more than the ones who were killed. Mm-hmm. And not to mention all the civilians who were destroyed. It was just totally stupid, which I don't mean, by the way, I just want your listeners to know, I don't mean to be just a radical pacifist. I am a bit of a pacifist, but not that radical. I approved uprooting the fanatic Taliban who were beating all the Afghani women and behaving like idiots. and not nurturing the crazy Al Qaeda and so on. I approved of that. But, I met this one guy, I forget his name, but a CIA guy who was working at the time when we got rid of the Taliban, which we did in 6 weeks, because we worked with the Northern Alliance and they directed, our intervention, and they helped us get the Taliban out of there, because the Afghanis considered the Taliban a kind of intrusion pushed by Pakistan. And they don't like anybody in their country. The Afghanis, they have a thing like that. They don't mind fighting each other, but they don't want other people in there. We pumped them up against the Russians, and we used the Pakistanis to do it. Pakistanis stayed up there, and they actually were backing the Taliban. So they were actually our enemy, yet we were acting like they were our allies. And we got them out in 6 weeks. And he said that his other colleagues who were helping the targeting and helping eject the Taliban at the very beginning after 9/11, they sent messages back to the home base, Pentagon, et cetera. Don't occupy this country. Look, you got them out, let them sort it out after that, and don't occupy. And of course, Rumsfeld and W, they stupidly jumped in there, but they didn't listen. But the guys who'd been on the ground there, special forces types, they knew very well that all you have to do to become the enemy in Afghanistan is try to occupy them. Even if you help them to start, if you then jump in and occupy them, then they say, oh, you helped us, so you want to occupy us. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then you become the enemy, and then this can be manipulated by the Pakistanis, et cetera, and then they act like they're liberating the country from you. Yeah. And so our guys didn't listen. And then not only didn't they listen, but instead of really doing a bang-up job, they're a quick and bang-up job helping, they then pulled out a lot of resources to go on the second dumb thing to Iraq. Right away, pretending that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, which was completely false. He was, in fact, our ally and our tool our government was using in its games with the Iranians. So it was just, basically really dumb policy. So I'm launching into all this just to say that we have to be smarter. We have to do that, we have to learn from things, When the Brits had their empire, they had whole universities to teach people the languages and the real thinking patterns of the countries they were dealing with in their empire. And they didn't just go in there and act like they could just do it with some interpreter. They really knew about it. They studied it. Mm-hmm. And we have been very careless, and lately especially we've been very, very sloppy. We've caused a lot of damage to ourselves and to others. And we really have to get the idea that we're a great country because of our emphasis on freedom and our emphasis on intelligence and high tech and even equality, finding a capable person, a smart person anywhere and bringing them up from whichever occupation or class or area. And that's our greatness. But our backwardness is this idea that we're so superior, Yeah. Well, that we have to get, and then we have nothing to learn from anybody else, and that we have to get over.
Sure. But I mean, here again, right? So it's a perfect example of how one who is pursuing that enlightenment, who is pursuing that, that wholeness, that beingness, like myself, through meditation, how is it that we can live in this world and be in it, right? But still, with the ego lurking and saying we need to be superior, we need to be the best, we need to have the most finest things, this mechanistic society that we have of materialism. Right. How do we live in it, but not be of it?
Well, that's the thing. The greatness of us is this Jeffersonian idea that all humans are equal. And actually, it should be expanded that animals are not just there to be eaten and to be messed with. They also have souls, and they also have minds, and they also have sensitivities and so forth. I mean, unfortunately, I am a meat eater, and, I like my steak too, and burger or whatever, but I don't like feedlots. That I don't like, and it's unhealthy to eat it all the time, Mm-hmm. But anyway, I'm not a saint or anything like that. I'm not holier than anybody. But, the key is to be realistic. When you say, how are we going to manage? We have to be very, very realistic. And we don't just swallow slogans that we get from some place. We don't. there's a wonderful joke that one famous theologian at the University of Chicago Divinity School taught me that I really love about a preacher who is preaching to the choir, and he says to the Sunday congregation, he says, "Now, you all, I want to know, some one of you all, you're faithful, wonderful people. I want to know, and that is, can you tell me what faith is? I want to hear you give me your definition of faith. Tell me you know what it is." And nobody would answer, none of the grown-ups. And there's little Johnny in the front row. He's got one arm up, practically dislocating his shoulder. And he doesn't want to ask Johnny. He wants a grown-up to say something. So he keeps saying, "No, come on, look, aren't you embarrassed? Little Johnny's holding up his hand and none of you are holding up your hand." People are shy. They don't want to say it. So finally he gives up with the grown-ups and he says, "Okay, little Johnny, you think you know what faith is? You're going to tell, I want you to tell these good people here, like, what is faith?" "Oh yeah, I can tell. I know, I can tell. "Okay, what is it? How do you define faith?" He says, "Faith is believing what you know ain't true." Love that. I love that, because actually that is a kind of faith, and that's taught too much in our churches because by the doubting Thomas story, like don't ask, just believe. But the point is, there is a faith there's blind faith, but it didn't used to be like that. We got into that because we thought we gave science also too much power, and we thought, oh, they're going to figure everything out because they're so smart. Then our religion must be wrong, but we're going to believe it anyway. And so, in a way, we have the misplaced faith too much in scientists who have done some nonsense. Some of it is really good, but some is nonsense. And we have the wrong kind of faith in the spiritual matters. And the point is, blind faith sucks because you subconsciously know that it ain't true. And so it's weak. And that's why you then might be fanatic and trying to bully other people to echo back what you're saying.
Yeah, well, it's the programming too.
You don't deeply believe it yourself.
Yeah.
For example, God is omnipotent, if you think that. And yet God is loving. But then that's okay as long as you're well-fed and happy and not crippled. Then really the stuff hits the fan, and you're having a really horrible time and you're not ready for Job. And then you're going to say, wait a minute, if God is omnipotent and he's compassionate, why is he doing this to me? Mm-hmm. He's responsible, because if he's omnipotent, that means he can do whatever he wants with anything. So then you suspect him, like for example, some of the people out of the Holocaust. They started, they were very pious before that. Then they started hating God. I know some famous ones who did. Finally, one famous one forgave him in a New York Times op-ed after 50 years later. But the point is that there's a reasonable faith. That's important, and that's something superior. But to get superior, you have to be critical and you have to be realistic about, well, this way that I behave is a bad habit. So I'm going to improve that habit. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to quit drinking. I'm not going to take that OxyContin. I'm not going to do this and that. And I'm not going to be harsh with my kids. I'm not going to be harsh with my wife. I'm not going to be whatever, violent. And I'm not going to lose my temper, all the time. And I know about that one because I was born with a hot temper. And now I'm too old to bother. But anyway, I can still lose it. But it's pretty mild now. So that's the thing, how can you do it? You be realistic. And when you're really realistic, then you want to not just know how you feel, you want to know how everybody else feels around you. You want to see what is the sources, what's the source of the good and the bad. You want to understand the causation in the way things are and in the way things are in you. And, you like, if you want to be like Olympic athlete, they don't run till they drop. And then they hurt themselves. Do you know what I mean? They manage and build up their strength in a gradual and skillful way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because they're realistic about the tolerance and the abilities of their body. And if they're not good at this sport, they pick one they are good at, and so on. In other words, to improve yourself and to live well in the world, you have to fit into the world. You have to realize you really are connected to everything, and it's connected to you. And you have to be grateful for that, and you don't get over exaggerated about your own importance, but you recognize your own responsibility and you interconnect with others, et cetera, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you know, nowadays, for example, I think in our country, we have this conspiracy issue that's going on. And I woke up on 4th of July with a weird thought in my mind, which I thought was a pretty happy thought. Mm-hmm. And I was urging, just mentally, because I don't have a big audience with people, but especially, you know, like the people, the insurrectionists, let's say, you know, mm-hmm. and the people who are into the QAnon or into Trump should be the president or Trump is great or whatever, poor Trump, who's really, you know, slightly mentally has mental problems, you know, but he's very energetic, has a wonderful, good energy in one way. Or he, you know, with the diet food that he eats, he would have already had a heart attack like 20 years ago. But he has natural strength, but he's confused, you know. And I read his sister's book, who's a psychiatrist, and I feel very compassionate for him, actually. Oh. I do. I mean, I'm annoyed at his behavior, but I'm very compassionate about him as a person, you know. And he's very fragile, actually, really, I think, inside, you know. And the idea of losing is something he can't cope with. That's why he's behaving like this. Mm. So, but he did lose, and he will continue the more he doesn't face it and become realistic. He could be a champ if he would be more realistic, but he's not able to do it. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm those people who think that Hugo Chavez was hiding in the computers, flipping TRUMP to BIDEN, you know, which you can neither prove nor disprove. It's like a scientific theory that is ridiculous because there's no proof and therefore there's no disproof either. You know, yeah. Just it's a blind faith belief. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, sending a message out to all those who are stuck on that sort of idea. Look, you might be right. I can't argue against you because you have no proof. If I argue with you, you're just going to say, well, that's the way it is because that's the way it is. So you're going to just keep repeating it, you know. So all I can say to you is, it isn't because it isn't. You know, and you're not going to listen to any other sort of counter evidence, you know, like Hugo Chavez wouldn't know about a computer company and he's dead, by the way. And so, you know, he's not really tampering with the computers. And, but here's the thing. Have your theory, consider that you have to overthrow the government. Okay. Never mind when you cash your baby check or you cash your Medicare or whatever you do, just think that, well, they deserve it. They're no good, you know, but I'll take that because I need the help and plan to overthrow it. But the thing is, you won't be successful if you're angry all the time and you're out shouting and screaming. That you won't be successful. You'll break some windows in the Capitol building, but that won't get you anywhere except jail time. So sit calmly and be happy in your house and meet your friends and conspire to overthrow the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. No problem. You know, and we'll wait for whatever you try to do. You know, that's nice. But don't be angry. And the way not to be angry is don't listen to any wannabe Rush Limbaugh. Don't listen to the miracle worker, Alex Jones, who should have a heart attack 3 times every program by the way he talks, screaming and shouting. You know, I'm afraid he's going to like bust his liver out of his throat. You know, when the way he talks, I feel really unhappy for him. When a few minutes I've watched him, I can't bear to watch anymore. It's like he's busting a gut. You know, and any wannabe Limbaugh Rush, you know, or any wannabe like Tucker. Yeah. A name like Tucker, man, that's a country club name. And you think that guy is the man of the people? Are you kidding with a name like Tucker? Give me a break. Anyway, point is, all they're doing is just making you mad. And then you're going to lose your ability to plan a good way to get rid of the devil. If you think the devil's in the White House, it's okay. I can't convince you he isn't. Mm-hmm. So, but happily figure out how to do it. And you'll do it more skillfully. And maybe if you're just happy, you're kind of like, well, whatever. I want to see wait to see his horns pop out from under his aviator glasses or whatever, you know, like just give yourself a break and give your family a break and your kids a break and don't get your cortisol going by watching and listening to those people. If they really believe what they're telling you, they wouldn't be so angry and so flipping out. What they're doing is they're manipulating your emotions by manifesting huge emotion at you. Mm-hmm. And you should really spare yourself that suffering. So this is what, of course, I didn't deliver this speech to anybody, but your superior self, our superior self, I'm delivering it to myself. Let's just be happy, whatever it is. That's my theory nowadays.
Just be happy.
Wisdom is bliss. My working title for that book was Buddhas Have More Fun. And it isn't, I don't mean Buddhists, because I know a lot of really miserable Buddhists, believe me. But there are also, I know some happy ones too. And I know miserable Christians and happy Christians. I know miserable Jews and happy Jews, miserable Muslims and happy Muslims, and miserable secularists and happy secularists. So it's, those things are not determinative, but Buddhas, which means someone who has become awakened to knowing how their mind works, what is a positive emotion, what is a negative one, and how to shift one's energies away from being hijacked by negative emotions, anger, greed, jealousy, excessive arrogance, and also delusive confusion and panic, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so that's the goal is be happy. Whatever you're doing, if it makes you happy, do it. And if it doesn't make you happy, don't do it. And don't think that you're happy just because when someone asks you, how are you? You go, I'm fine. Because you want to show off being happy, but that's even more stress for you. Mm-hmm. So that's my theory.
I love that.
If we all focus on being more happy, having more fun, we will get out of this mess that we're in.
Do you still meditate now? Do you still do all the things that you used to do?
Well, no, I'm more lazy now because I'm retired. I'm retired, and but in another way, what I did trying to be more superior to my previous self, and that wasn't that hard because I wasn't that superior before. As I said, I had a hot temper. I was I was sort of trained and socialized to be very competitive and so on, and so I'm definitely better on those counts, but I'm not perfect, but I'm better. Sure. And I'm much happier, therefore. And I can't, sometimes my wife doesn't really believe it usually, but I'm trying to listen. But if I don't listen to her, it usually doesn't end well. Because, in general, women are more realistic than men. Because, they like, for example, about self and other, they kind of know that other people are not that other. Because they have one come popping out of their gut. Or even if they don't, they could. And so they sort of know what that feels like. They can imagine it more easily than we can. Do you know a man who would be willing to have a non-rent paying tenant in their stomach for 10 months, 9 months, without any pay, sucking up all their vitamins and their calcium and so on, making them gain 20 pounds of weight and so on? Forget about it. And then having to haul it out of there, that's one big that's a big worst labor in the world. Do you have a wife and kids?
Yeah, I have a wife and 3 kids. So I've been
three kids. All right. Were you ever in the delivery room?
Oh yeah. I was the worst delivery partner ever. Like I'm sitting there pushing her leg, and I'm thinking it's like the harder I push, the faster baby comes out. So I'm like pushing hard, trying to get this baby out, and she's hitting me. She's like, you're hitting me, you're hurting me. And I'm just like, come on, let's go.
I know you're better than me. I was the other side. I was a chicken. I was like, look, if she doesn't want the spinal block, I do. Give it to me. Whatever. And then when they screamed, I say, well, don't scream, like breathe. And the doctor says, shut up, let her scream. I had music to my ears, the doctor says.
Did you see the babies come out?
Yeah, I did.
Did you faint?
Well, actually, I had 5 children. And I only managed to get in to that, wasn't kicked out by either my wife or in the older days by the policies, one time. And so I only saw the baby come out one time. And everybody else thought it would be a girl, because we had already a boy and a girl. And the girl who dominates our life and our family wanted another baby sister, not another bratty boy. So they were all saying it was a girl, and I somehow knew from practically conception it was going to be a boy. I knew it. But I was embattled because everybody else was saying it was a girl. So the first thing I saw was the dick came out, and also he was blue. Mm-hmm. So then as I'm fainting, which I did, I passed out. And I don't know why, on subconscious thing, but I was fainting. All I had in my mind was, well, we'll say he's a little baby Krishna. Because I didn't know that when the air hasn't touched the skin, that the first bluish. Yeah. And the nurse expected me to pass out and whapped a chair right behind my leg. So I just clunked into the chair, And so it's just, I didn't really fall down too far, luckily. But that was but I was triumphant on the other hand, because I saw the dick coming out. I said, okay, guys, you're all wrong. There's another guy. So then our daughter threatened to leave home. But then after a day or two, she came to her mom and she said, well, I guess little boys are also human beings. She said, so I guess I'll stay, she said. Do you have boys or girls?
I have 2 girls and 1 boy. The boy was the first. I got him knocked out early, so I got the boy and then the 2 girls. I didn't think.
Which was first? The eldest is the boy?
The oldest is the boy, yeah, and then I have 2 girls.
He's so lucky to have those 2 sisters.
Oh man, I love being a girl dad. I absolutely love being a girl dad. Like I love it.
And of course, it's really great. And boy dad is a little more challenging. Because in general, we guys have more, my wife says that men tend to come out of adolescence around 60 or 70. They kind of do. And the girls, they're out of it at 12, Absolutely. They grow up real fast. Anyway, we got into this because I was saying women tend to be more realistic and to be better at relationships and things. And so men should really follow their direction and guidance instead of having to act like they know everything.
Sure.
And they'll be much happier if they do,
Well, let me ask you this. So like through your meditation and through your life, have you ever reached that oneness in meditation without honesty?
Sure. Yes, definitely.
What is that like? I know it's probably ineffable and it's probably something you can't explain in language, but can you do your best to describe that?
Sure. Well, basically what it is it's a negational thing. It isn't a affirmational thing. The negational thing is that you keep reducing discriminations because actually everyone feels oneness all the time. For example, when someone looks up at the sky or something, just suddenly they hear a sound and they look up like that. So the sight, the sense of sight is particularly like that because you see things at a distance, right? So then when you look up at sky, which you don't have an immediate range object, you kind of get lost there. And so what your brain does is immediately whaps a concept into your thought mind, thinking mind. I'm looking at the sky. So the concept severs your subjectivity from the object, which is really no object. It's getting lost in space, basically. So the meditations of what they call freedom or emptiness or openness are where you look at wherever there seems to be a boundary or closedness, and you investigate it, and you realize that, well, there's another side to the boundary. Do you know what I mean? It seems like that's the end, that's the wall. But actually, of course, there's something else on the wall. And this is where I love materialistic science, although I don't like that they're trapped in the dogma of materialism. Then they don't realize there's a mind and a soul and a spirit and all that. Yeah. But I love what they have discovered because by their analysis of matter down to the quantum level, they realized almost 100 years ago that when you really keep taking everything apart, in other words, investigate the seeming object that seems to withstand analysis, it dissolves under analysis. And, you can't find anything, and therefore things open up. And then recursively, let's say, like a recursive thing, like a recursive computer program, your brain recursively realizes that my experience starts from a solid point of my subjectivity is also illusory, like my sense that that's a solid wall. And so you do a thought experiment, like Einstein did. He discovered all these things by doing what are called thought experiments. And we think, oh, that can't be that powerful. That won't really change your being. But it does when you do it with a deep level of concentration. And that's where meditation becomes important. So you can really, really focus on that to a real depth, you become like laser sharp focus. And so when you do that, you keep dismantling seeming objects, etc., and your sense of the purchase that your concept of that's a wall, that's another thing, that's the far distance, this is a tree, this is me, and then going in, this is my brain and my optic nerve and my thinking thing and blah, 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 and myself as if it were a solid thing. And you end up, all of these things kind of dissolve under that analysis, driven with very sharp concentration. And then you sort of melt. It's like you melt in a hot tub. You melt in orgasm. You melt in a thrilling thing. You get really scared in a super roller coaster, but then you have to let go, and you kind of just melt into the thrill. And maybe you scream, but you like it because you let go of trying to control a situation you can't. If you keep gripping like that, you practically bust a gut, And so it's an exercise, and you have to do it bit by bit, because if you push yourself too fast, then you'll get lost, kind of, and scared. Yeah. But it can be scary. So you just bit by bit, you do, and then finally also you melt down the starting point. It becomes recursive, and then you have an experience of complete freedom, and then you can call that later oneness. But that's not the end of it. The last trap, actually, you find examples of in a lot of spiritual traditions. And someone comes back from a transcendental experience like that, and then they tell you, oh, when I was out there and it was all one, that was it. That's absolute. That's absolute reality. So now I've discovered absolute reality. But then they're telling you, like, well, why do you come back here? You ask them, didn't they? Well, I'm just back just for the hell of it. And now, you should probably worship me because I went out there and I was all one. And that's a trap, because in other words, they made some experience to be an absolute. Where you have to go if you get deeper is that your experience of that absolute, or your interpretation of the freedom of openness, that was the one, and that's a place, is then differentiating it from here and now, and then here and now is totally devalued, and you just want to go back there, if you follow me, kind of. But you feel you can hang out just to be nice, but you can rationalize it. But I call it, therefore, that kind of thing, the cheap oneness. But the expensive oneness is when the oneness itself disappears, and then you're sitting here talking with Trey, and you're hanging out, and yet you're doing it within an envelope of oneness. So therefore, you can sort of be this is what I call being more realistic, because, for example, if I haven't reached that level, but if I had reached that level, I could really experience this event through Zoom from your side as equal to my side. I've gotten close enough where I realize it is equal, but I don't viscerally necessarily feel that. So I can't read your mind. I'm not completely empathetic with you, if you follow me. So I don't exactly know what you're thinking and how you feel or whatever, but I can kind of get a sense of it, and I try to do it more. And I have a more sense of your viewpoint than just being stuck on my own viewpoint than I used to. But I kind of know the destination, and I'm not trapped in any sort of momentary experience of oneness when nobody's home. Who's one? Nobody. So it's all one. And oh, gee whiz, everybody else has just disappeared. All the ones I love, I'm responsible for, I'm connected to, they're all gone. But I don't feel guilty because I'm gone too.
Yeah. Is that Christ consciousness?
I'm still going to say that state, which is fundamentally, in a way, a kind of psychotic state if you get stuck in it. If you don't get stuck in it, it's a deeply revelatory state, because you then sort of oscillate back and forth in your years of practice, slowly, gradually, and then you get more unifying your experience among differentiated things, and then you have a more global experience. But what's his name? Remember the famous running back who then was involved in that murder? And, then we don't know nobody. OJ, that's right. OJ, his name was OJ, right? OJ Simpson. Well, before that happened, I used to admire him a lot. And I was very impressed by one thing. I don't know if you ever, you were maybe too young, you didn't notice that. But one thing before, he was sort of maybe a bad guy or at least crazy or whatever. We don't know, different people think different things. But before that, when he would run with the crappy team Buffalo, and he would run through a whole Steelers, he'd run through the whole field of them all the way to the touchdown. But he used to say what happens to him when he gets in a certain zone is he's running and he's totally in his body, but he's also hovering over the field, and he can kind of see someone charging him from where his eyes wouldn't really be seeing them. So he has a kind of 360, he would have a kind of 360-degree peripheral vision, so he could evade a tackler coming from 3/4 behind that he shouldn't have been able to see, because he's also watching for some guy on the 3/4 in front. And that was the secret of his amazing ability. In other words, he had a kind of field perception, sort of, which should be impossible, right? But he always said he had that. And I don't know how different people either believed it or didn't believe it, but I believed it. And I'm sure you can have that kind of, you can expand your awareness like that. I know human beings can. And somehow, whatever later problems he got into, whatever, I'm not passing judgment, but that was deeply amazing. And that indicated that his success came from, again, being more realistic, being more aware of the reality around him, like 360 degrees, rather than just where he's like focusing, which then makes him vulnerable to every tackler from every side. He never would have run through that whole team, like he used to do. So a lot of athletes and people who do extraordinary things, they have this kind of different perceptions, and we can cultivate those. And definitely, if I was a running back, I would want to have like a drone perception from above while I'm running. Do you know what I mean? And I can see like futuristic football teams where the running back has an implant in his brain, like some weirdo from Google puts an implant in there and he's watching a movie from himself from above while he's fully running here. And then no one could catch him. They'll try that. It probably won't work, actually.
Well, it's like that bird's eye view they have now, like Monday Night Football, right? When it's like right behind the quarterback and he's getting ready to snap the ball. I don't know if you watch football or not, but
I do sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes they have this camera now, this angle where it's like right above the quarterback, and
I know,
like right above him, and it's like
I know.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like that, what you're explaining.
It is. So imagine that you had a consciousness that could do that without any mechanical equipment. And that's what he did have. And that's why he was such a great runner. So that's the sort of thing,
Yeah.
So we are capable, we humans, if we really be more realistic about ourselves and about the world around us, we are much more capable of things than we're taught to think we are. Because in a way, and that's what my book is about. I feel that in my old age, even though I don't claim to be enlightened, but I do claim to be, reasonably have a reasonable faith, not blind faith, but a reasonable faith, because I could be wrong, but it's reasonable, that I will get enlightened sometime. And then by knowing the definition of enlightenment, that in the future, when I'm enlightened, I will realize I've always been enlightened, because you get into a different sense of time. You realize that the sense of being locked into a split second between past and future that moves like a line moving on a video editing graph, that you're not really trapped there, and your awareness is in all the past and future. And when I really become enlightened, I will know that I'm already enlightened, even though I don't know it now. But then I will revise my experience of now. So I know that. So that makes me feel it's nearby and makes me happy, Wow. It keeps me happy. It keeps me trying to be happy, put it that way.
I could talk to you all night. I love having you on this show. But I'm going to respect your time. I know it's late.
That's true. Yeah, it is. It is time. And my wife will scold me. She wasn't there to go.
Well, how can people find out more about you? How can they find your book?
Well, they go to Amazon or they go to Hay House International. It's called Wisdom is Bliss, 4 friendly, fun facts that can change your life. And, I'm talking about And it's to make them feel, because, I think Jesus had fun, and he said it's like every lily in the field, it's just perfect. The Father really makes it perfect. The way he understood the ultimate reality was that everything is brilliant and beautiful, and he was like that. And but then they make a religion where you're supposed to be all bad, and you have to follow this rule, do that, and you're a sinner, and you're going to go to hell. And that's ridiculous that a benevolent being would ever send anybody to hell. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Even the worst devil or sinner, they still won't. They might have to, whip him into shape, but they never send him to eternal hell. That's just absolutely absurd. But it's put in by religious leaders who are in league with the authorities of societies that are militarized or authoritarian societies, to frighten people into being obedient, sheep-like people. And we humans have to be responsible for our freedom. We have to be intelligent the way we exercise our responsibility, and we have to, and we know we're doing that when we're happy. So that's why I say wisdom is bliss. And we wrongly say ignorance is bliss, because we're brainwashed that reality sucks, so we don't want to know what it is, and we'll be better if we don't know. But that's false. If we believe some distorted view of reality that somebody terrorizes us with, we will be like that. We don't like. Depression is a huge American epidemic, right? And it's a big drug. Antidepressants is the best big product. And because we're told we don't mean anything, we're not worth anything, that life is pointless, that we might as well just be nothing right away. We're told that. That's what they're challenging the spirituality, and they're challenging the mind because of the materialism. They're supposedly reality mongers, which are the scientists, and they tell us we don't really exist. And that's ridiculous, because we know we exist. But maybe we exaggerate the way we exist, and we can learn better how we exist. But that we exist, we don't doubt.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a great thing. And reality loves us. And the tree, that tree outside your house, and that blade of grass, all it wants to do is it wants your carbon that you breathe out, and it wants to release some oxygen for you to breathe in. And therefore, that plant loves you.
I love it.
And we should love it. Go out at the tree. Okay, and hug those kids, and hug that better half.
Absolutely.
All right, Trey?
All right, Mr. Thurman, thank you so much for joining the show.
It's my pleasure.